What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. We're continuing our offseason season review series. We're going to talk a little bit about the Seattle Surge, an interesting season from them, including an event win. We're going to talk about their journey from start to finish and what they should do in the offseason to upgrade their team. Let's dive in. Look, the season prior to this season was not particularly good. I have the results from the 2021 season here pulled up, and the first 2 years of the CDL, Seattle had a pretty uncompetitive team. I mean, we can kind of dive in deeper on it, but I don't think it's really worth it for this video. But you know, they had a completely different roster last season, which you can see here. They had Sam Octane, they had Gunless, they had Bristine, they had Classic, Looney was their substitute, and they really struggled at points throughout the season. They had Decimate in at one point as well, and that didn't really work out. So they made some major changes in the offseason going into this season. So going into the 2022 season, Seattle had a completely new roster. You had a completely different coach, Sam Phoenix coming in for Nubsy, and with that, another series of changes. You had Classic stay on the team as a substitute, but your starting lineup was completely different. Bringing over Accuracy, the veteran AR presence, has won a lot of tournaments in his heyday. You have Matt coming over from the New York Subliners, had a really good first year. Second year was up and down, but the whole team was up and down. Siblins, who was a rookie at the CDL level, but had played a couple of years in Challenger, starting at the beginning of the CDL for the Atlanta FaZe Academy. And you had Pred coming over from Australia, a much heralded player with a lot of cred behind him. Hadn't really played against elite competition, so there were definitely question marks about his ability coming into the season, but the tape that was out there and the cred, for no pun intended there, was pretty high, so a lot of expectations on him. And for Seattle, actually not a bad start to the season. You went 3-2, a lot of teams 3-2, 2-3 in the first set of qualifiers for Major 1. They did go ahead and lose to Florida and London, but they beat Minnesota, New York, and Toronto to go ahead and get the 5th seed going into the event at Esports Stadium Arlington. And unfortunately from there, they really did not have a good weekend. They lost to the hosting Optic Texas team 3-0 in a very quick fashion. And then the next round, in what was pretty much a surprise upset, they went to game 5 against a Paris team that was playing with a fresh roster for this event, and they could not get it done. And for Seattle, after your strong start, getting top 12 was definitely difficult. And I didn't mention it prior to this, but they also had a pretty good showing at Kickoff Classic. So this one kind of like came out of nowhere. I think people thought that Seattle would be a top 8, top 16 coming to this event. So top 12 was definitely not the start that they were looking for. Definitely a mixed bag for them in the Major 2 qualifiers leading into the Minnesota event. They did qualify for winners, but right on the cut line by essentially one map, going 2-3 and having the tiebreaker over the Minnesota Rocker. They had a pretty nice victory against Atlanta FaZe and LA Thieves, but they really struggled against Boston, LAG, and Optic Texas during this run online. And they definitely had a better showing at this event than Major 1. They took care of business, a probably signature victory for this team and a big confidence booster against an Optic Texas team by smoking them 3-0 on the first day. They did lose a tough game 5-2 Atlanta FaZe, in which then they dropped into losers, and unfortunately had to go up against the team that essentially won the tournament, LAG, in the second round of losers. But for Seattle, you lost 2 tough game 5s to 2 really good teams. In fact, the 2 teams ended up being in the grand finals. So from there, a top 6 placing, not too bad, something to build on and to get you points to qualify for champs down the line. Seattle was drawn in Group 8 for the Pro event in Columbus, Ohio, and unfortunately it was not a particularly good showing for them on this weekend. They went 0-3, a surprising loss to a Strike X team, and they couldn't get it done against FaZe in Toronto. And again, I think this is sort of the story for Seattle this season. They had some really good highs on land, but a lot of lows, and getting top 16 this event I think was pretty disappointing for this roster. So going into Major 3, like, they were pretty up against it, and it was sort of like at this point, and we'll talk about their map pool later more in this video, but they were a really good Tuscan team. But outside of Tuscan, I think they were like super up and down. Even on Tuscan, sometimes it was sort of down to X Factor players and Sib and Mac on how they would play on a given day. But during the Major 3 cycle, they found kind of a form of consistency and played pretty good start to finish. They played the online portion and went 4-1, tying with Toronto and Optic Texas and getting the 3rd seed overall through those tiebreakers. Some really nice victories against Florida, London, the Thieves, and Paris, and the only loss they had was against Toronto in a game 5. And you know what? Seattle pulls up to Toronto, a really cool event, and they actually get it done and win the whole thing. So let's talk about their journey. They play a tough, close game 5 against New York on day 1. New York playing much better at this point with a few roster swaps and being a much improved hardpoint team. They then face off against the Florida Mutineers, who are coming off a big win against Optic Texas, and Seattle get it done in 4 maps to advance to winners finals. And from there, they mega clutch up against FaZe. Some really close, exciting maps played in this series. It does go the distance, but Seattle are the better team in game 5 and get it done and advance to grand final. Atlanta FaZe do beat Toronto in a game 5, and these 2 teams rematch. Seattle gets off to a hot start in the grand finals. It's a little bit back and forth, but Seattle are just proved too strong on the controls, and they get it done before we get to map 9, closing out on an 8th Hard point, I think for Seattle, I mean, people expected them to play pretty good this tournament, but to win, I think was a little bit of a surprise. I think you probably would have predicted FaZe or maybe Optic to win this tournament. But for Seattle, after some up and downs on LAN, you finally get your signature win. You really show this young team can win and beat some of the best teams on LAN, and you pretty much lock in your champ spot at this point by getting the full allotment of points. But unfortunately for Seattle, that's sort of the high point of their season. Going down to sort of the later parts, Major 4 and champs, they really started to struggle. They go 1-4 after that big Major 3 win, not making it to winner's bracket for the New York event. Seattle's only victory is against a Paris team that has basically had their bags packed at this point. They got 3-0 smoked by FaZe, 3-1 loss against Boston. They lost a tough game 5 to Minnesota, and they lost to New York as well. And then at Major 4, they really only played one series. It was against the Boston Breach coming out of winner's bracket, and it went to game 5, but Seattle will get it done. And their weekend in New York is super short. They're done Friday. They don't even make it to Saturday, Sunday, and they place top 12 again at a major. But they had enough points and they were able to qualify for Call of Duty champs, and actually not a particularly bad showing for this team at champs. They do get it done against London in a game 5. Amongst a lot of game 5s on day 1. They face off against Atlanta FaZe, and Pred does his thing on this series. He absolutely helps clutch up 2 hard points for the guys, but they really don't have an answer for FaZe's mid control on Tuscan S&D, and FaZe get it done in the winner's bracket 3-2 game 5. Seattle, they drop down the losers. They play a Texas team coming off a big 3-0 win against New York and Crim, and once again, Pred does his thing in hard point, and this team knocks out Optic Texas and advances to top 3 loser set finals with a 3-1 victory over Optic Texas. And then the sort of same stories are matched up with FaZe. Like Seattle looks really good in the respawns, but I think sort of Seattle's sort of why they didn't really kind of take that last step at champs is their S&D was a real struggle point for them here at the end of the season. And again, Tuscan, they have real no answer for FaZe in the middle of the map on control and S&D, and FaZe get it done in 4 maps and advance to the grand finals. And for Seattle, not a bad showing at the end of the season. You do end up getting top 3. For Seattle, as we talked about in the previous videos, a lot of teams that end up being kind of like 500 around map win record and series win record. It was no different for the Seattle team. They were 18-17 overall in series by the end of the season. Their strongest game mode was definitely hardpoint. If you take a look at these map win records, like they definitely sucked at Gava2, don't get me wrong, but the other 3 maps they were definitely strong at. By the end of the season, no one really wanted to play them on Bocage hardpoint, even though if you look by win record, you might think that's the weakest of the 3 maps, but bro, Perwood's like an automatic 40 on the map, so no one wanted to play them on that. They were solid at Berlin outside of, I believe, Major 3. Every other split, they were pretty fantastic on this map. And then Tuscan, this was sort of the X Factor map for them. When they were winning, they were very good at it, but when they were struggling, this was a map that a lot of teams were taking them on across all game modes. Control was another strength for them, and again, you see that Tuscan record 13-16. Same thing as the hardpoint. Like when they were on, these guys were unbeatable on Tuscan control. Pred was doing his thing, Sib was going double pause, but at times when they were struggling, they really couldn't grab a victory on Tuscan control. Berlin, they weren't too bad. This ended up being a 500 map for most teams. And then Gava2 is really a struggle point for Seattle. Across Gava2 hardpoint and control, 1-12 this season. Kind of nuts that they were 1-12 in Gava2 all season. They got top 3. That's pretty impressive, basically having auto veto in 2 game modes. S&D was definitely an area of improvement for this team, which is surprising because they have Lamar, who's sort of the S&D Iceman on their team. They were really good at Tuscan in sort of the beginning of the season, but hard fell off by the time we got to Major 2 and Pro-Am. They were playing Bocage a bit at the end and definitely showed some strength on it, but teams pretty much avoided playing them on it. Siege was up and down and mostly negative for them, and they played a lot of Berlin at the end of the season, but just not a lot of success there. And like to dive in further, right? Like the event that they won, the stage 3 where they went 8-1 in map series, like you can see that their strengths were control and hardpoint, but they were also a definite plus S&D team with 4-1 victory on Desert Siege. Obviously the Tuscan 1-4 is a little bit surprising, but they were good on all 3 maps other than Tuscan. And 1-5 in stage 4, and you can see that they hard fell off in hardpoint, really not taking advantage on Bocage, and teams are pretty much avoiding playing them on Tuscan hardpoint. The S&D wasn't there, and while they were still winning controls, it's not really going to get you that far if you're not winning the other 2 game modes. And look, they got back in it at champs, and look, it's on the back of this hardpoint. 9-1 only loss on Tuscan hardpoint, but their limiter was control. Again, winning only 1 control throughout the weekend, and 2-5 in S&D is just not going to get it done at a champs event where you got to get to game 5 and be able to close. So taking a look at these KDs, shout out Easy Mac, and it may not necessarily support the drop Lamar arguments. Look, like my personal thought process is not everybody needs to drop a 1.0 on a team for you to be a dominant team. Lamar averaging a 0.97, considering how inconsistent he was at times is pretty impressive if you think about it. They really only need a 0.95 for him at most. If he fries, great, but you got guys like Mac, Pred, and Sib on your team who are going to be dropping above a 1. There's plenty of kills to go around, and I think Lamar is definitely contributing in ways that we'll get to later in this video. I think we obviously got to tip Pred season. A 1.09 is super impressive with the sub, and there's a reason why he was Rookie of the Year and definitely an MVP candidate as well. Dante 108 is a rookie with a flex position, is super impressive. Mac was definitely the X factor on this team. He ended up finishing with a 1. It's really a 0.99 if you look at it. He was actually a 4 kills in the differential on the negative side of that. But again, I think, you know, like, I really like the young core in this team. Slaying wise, they're going to be able to hang with the best. And that really gets us to sort of the contract conversation with this team. And like, what do you do in the offseason, right? You know that you were really strong in hard points at time this season. S&D wasn't your best game mode and you were going to control, but consistency wasn't there. And that's to be expected, right? First year this team formed, they're a super young team. Outside of Lamar, most of these guys have only played for a couple of years. Mac hadn't played like a full season of land Call of Duty prior to this. You have a new coach. I think you got to run it back with this roster. I don't even think you make a change to Lamar, because for me, I think Lamar provides stability to this team. And yes, the results weren't consistent, but I think if you take Lamar out of the picture, it'd be even more inconsistent and maybe making some dumbass roster changes as well when they would hit those valleys and they couldn't get out. And look, yeah, I get it. You're not going to get like high tier 1.1 slaying from Lamar. You're not going to get Celium level performances, but Lamar knows how to organize his troops. He knows how to have them play structured Call of Duty, and he knows how to really motivate young players. You've seen it in his career with Kenny, with Pharaoh. So I like the contribution that Lamar can give, and you know he had that built-in chem with Mac when they had the success on the New York Subliners, the inaugural season of the CDL. But let's say hypothetically, right? Like, let's talk option B. Let's say, you know, screw it, we're going to go ahead and make a change to Lamar. What's out there from a main AR perspective? Well, instantly I think of Lamar's duo and best friend Attach. I don't know why I said attach that way, but whatever. Obviously, I think there's a question mark on whether or not he's going to stay on Minnesota or not. I personally think that he's probably kind of 50-50 in that situation, depending on what team he can build in Minnesota. He would definitely be a good addition to this to the Seattle lineup, but personally, I don't see Dylan replacing his best friend's spot on a team. Like, that just seems weird to me. And like, anyone that's going to replace Lamar has to really bring that leadership role, especially in game, to pace set his team. And Dylan's not really necessarily that type of player. He can bring a lot of comms and real stability, but from a pace setting perspective, that's not really a card that he normally has to play on a team. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best move. I think two other AR players you can take a look at. Skies would be an interesting pickup coming off of Florida Meteors team that has been pretty inconsistent the last 2 years. We know Caesar can be really good in S&D and maybe bring some of that leadership you would need. But again, I don't really see a lot of positives with switching Lamar in this situation. You know, Skies would be a good option. It would be affordable too. I don't think you need to break the bank to get him. Probably the sort of weirder of the potential options here is having Clay go to Seattle. It's definitely a weird personality fit. You know, Clay has definitely made a habit of teaming with young players and getting the best out of them. But we saw what happened this season when Clay takes that like hard line with players. Sometimes they shut down, and I really don't know if that personality fit is going to work on this team. On top of the fact with Clay, I think there's still a question mark about performances, but sure, you can entertain it. I don't really see the swap with Lamar. And look, we can talk about challengers options as well if we're going to go down this indulgence of let's swap out Lamar. I mean, you got names like Assault, Mohawk, God RX, even a player like Diamond Con. But personally, look, here's sort of my final thought on it. I get it. Seattle wasn't consistent this season. You want to try and get more slaying because you think that's going to make this team more consistent. I don't think that's really the fix. I think it's more of a growth and potential thing with the younger players on the team, right? A player like Pred, a player like Mac, a player like Sib. These are young guys and they're still learning how to play a structured version of Call of Duty. And sometimes they execute the system well, like you saw at Champs, like you saw at Major 3. But then you saw events like Major 4 and Major 2 and Major 1 where like they're good, but they're not amazing. And when they play some of these other more disciplined teams, they really get in a lot of trouble. So my personal thought is this: if you're Seattle, I think you run it back with this roster. You have them on team options. I would probably renegotiate deals with a bunch of these guys. Now that their roster rules have changed, and we'll talk about that in a later video, we can get up to 3-year deals. You try and lock these guys down to renewals so you don't have this issue next season where all of their deals are up and then you're probably building a new team if they want to dip and make more money. Like, this is as good of a talented roster as you're going to get with some of the free agents available this year. And I really don't think swapping Lamar out, the upside of bringing in a new player is not as strong as running it back with this team and trying to improve your team performance and your team chemistry, because you won this year, right? You had some highs. You played good at Champs. You could definitely hang with Thieves, Optic, and FaZe. You had victories against those guys. But it's about finding consistency and doing that throughout the season and not just 2 events throughout the year. So let me know, guys, what you think, right? Do you think Seattle should run it back with this roster? Do you think they should make a change? Put your comments below and I'll kind of discuss with you what you think about your ideas. If you liked the video, smash that like button. If if you want to subscribe to my videos, I'd really appreciate that. We'll be churning out plenty of content over the next couple of weeks as roster mania starts to kick up. And as always, guys, we will see you on the next one.